Welch, and I was in the Peace Corps in Honduras from 1962 to 1964. And while we were in the Peace Corps, in October of 1963, there was a military coup and they overthrew the government. And so I was assigned to develop programs at a community center, and all our funds were cut off. So I decided, and I was in San Pedro Sula, which fortunately was a good-sized city. So I, along with my co-worker, I said, how about if we go to all the businesses in town and see if they will give us a free sample of their products so we can have a carnival to raise money. So the carnival was all set up for in November, and the day before the carnival, President Kennedy was assassinated. And we could not believe it. In the house that we were staying, when they kept saying Presidente Asesinado, we kept thinking it was a Latin American president because you had heard about it at that time. And so I didn't cry at first, but when I came to we went home for lunch. When I came to the community center, the people were just sobbing all over the place because they all loved the Kennedys. And so they said, well, out of respect for President Kennedy, we shouldn't have the carnival. In the meantime, the whole community center was all set up with all these prizes and gifts and so forth that were going to be used to raise the money. And so I said, out of respect for President Kennedy, this is what he would want, because the Peace Corps was his dream. And their faces just lit up and they said, we will do it. And out of that, we raised 500 lempiras, which was about $250. It was enough to keep the community center going for 3 months until the funds were returned to the community center by the military that were now running it. And secondly, it enabled me to start the first 8-week day camp, which was over the months, over December and January, because oddly enough, that's when they had their summer vacation, even if it was winter. So that's my story.
All right, I'm Sharon Mayhall. My maiden name is Messmer, and that's when I was in the Peace Corps prior to being married. I went down with Honduras 3 immediately after college graduation in 1964 and served for a full 2 years in Honduras. We flew into Tegucigalpa, and then really the only reasonable access to the community where we worked was by plane a couple times a week, weather permitting. They would fly into a cow pasture and leave us off at a place called La Esperanza, which was contiguous with an Indian settlement known as Intibucá, which is also the name of the departamento or state in Honduras, where I was. When we were placed in our sites, the idea was that you stayed there and you integrated with the people and got all the benefits of immersion. Really important for me because my Spanish wasn't very strong when I got there, and it was really sink or swim. Get out there, get to know the people, start learning that second language by hook or crook. And so we were in our site almost all of the time. I was with one other woman who was a To begin with, when we started the program, we brought them in and weighed and measured everybody. Stood these little people up against the wall with the hatch marks to see how tall they were and to get pictures of their stature. And they were typically skinny-armed, big-bellied little kids full of worms. So Jamar had written nurse friends back home in the States and said, can you find some medicines that we could administer to these children just orally so that we can rid the worms from their bodies before we even begin? And she got a good response. We got it through the customs, so that actually in the village we received these medicines, and then she and her counterpart at the health center administered these to the children. The funny story about that was that the perception was that those big bellies were part of the health of the children. And when they started expelling these enormous worms and their tummies started to shrink, there was a lot of fear among some of the families that we might be evil. We might be doing something that was very negative to their children rather than trying to do something for their children.
So the big belly is a sign of health.
Exactly, exactly, yeah. So there was that education component. No, this is really all right, and note the worms that they're expelling, and those are not good for your child to have in their gut. We took the pictures, and the surprising results was these kids in 6 months had shot up 3 inches. And of course, their tummies looked different. I mean, the value of protein was absolutely obvious. We left the country feeling like we had made a difference, like unequivocally our time was well spent. So it has always been my joy to say that my Peace Corps experience was positive plus. The Indians that we served were called Lincolns, and they were a stream of the Mayans, so a noble history in their own right. But when we encountered them, what really tore our hearts out was that their approach to life was what they called humilde, and that means humble. You saw these people coming in out of the campo, and they would not look at you. The eye contact was not possible, and we grew through that. We got so that these women, these moms, their husbands, their families were our friends, and they didn't any longer feel that they had to kowtow in any way or feel shy about what they had to offer. That was just very rewarding to see them bloom.
Would look more at you than
oh yeah, oh yeah, visibly different. One of the little gals that was in this group of 6th graders that I initially started working with, Lupe Vasquez, was the eldest in a family of 7 children. And she had a little brother that was the right age for our program. Lupe was finishing 6th grade during the time that I was teaching them, and it became apparent that she wasn't going beyond that in school simply because she was needed at home to help with the child care and the sustenance of their family. But she was obviously exceptional. She wanted education. She became a teacher, and I kept up with her. I have in a prominent place in my home her wedding picture with Jesus she sent to me, and as best we could, without the technology that we know today, we tried to stay in touch. So in the year 2000, I told my husband, who hadn't yet retired, this was such a meaningful part of my life. I hope you will go, we can go, and you will share it with me. I had now been away for more than 30 years. This was my first time back.
And La Esperanza was where you were stationed?
La Esperanza in Tibuca, this kind of double community. It had changed markedly when I was there. There was no electricity. A couple hours, 2 nights a week, if they could fire up the generators, we could get electricity where we were. But other than that, you know, we had lanterns for light and that sort of thing. Now there was electricity. People had refrigeration, many, not out in the campo again, but the people that lived in town, and this included Lupe and her family. Her dad had a mechanic shop, I believe, where he did some small mechanical work to sustain their family. She had married this man, and she had recently been forced to retire because the teachers are employees of the state and they have to retire at age 55. So Lupe was now age 55. I'm about 10 years older than her. Her husband was a little older, so he had been a teacher as well, but was forced to retire. Lupe had a school named after her. He had become the math and technology expert for the whole state or departamento, so they were quite prominent in the community. They had raised 3 daughters who were also teachers, one son, their youngest, who was going to school on the North Coast to become a professional agronomo, agriculturalist. They were so happy to see us that we walked around and finally found the place where they were living, and my husband was just amazed with the greeting that we got. He said, "Sharon, it seems like to them you're Mother Teresa coming back." So we were wined and dined with their best hospitality, had lots of visits. I had made photo albums of pictures, and when we were there, we were the only people who had a camera. Okay, these Peace Corps volunteers came in with cameras, and they didn't exist. And so I had this fat album that I had hauled down there. When I dug that out, and this included the before and after pictures of these little people between 2 and 5 that we had served, we started looking, those people just descended and came and gathered around and laughed and loved seeing their history, seeing sometimes their dead relatives that were no longer around. And the children, this little boy that was Lupe's little brother, he was one of the naked little kids that was stood up against the wall to measure. And did he get teased? You know, now he's a young man, 35 or 40 years old, and we come up with this picture of him nude in his childhood. So those kinds of delightful experiences happened just on that first visit. We left there, and actually I had intended to go back about now. But I have been, the last 8 years, I have been in cancer treatment. So my plans have not worked out. The reason that I was wanting to go back now is because my niece, who lives in the Bay Area, took a job as she graduated last year from Santa Cruz and went to teach on the north coast of Honduras. And our hope had been that we would take her mother and the 3 of us go back and spend a week or 2 with Nancy, and that she'd have an opportunity to get to know my beloved family. And I just haven't been able to make the trip, but I sure would like to be there.